Welcome to this panel, which is entitled, because I wrote it, Web 2.0 Technologies in Law Teaching, Practical and Legal Issues. I'm Jackie Lipton. I'm a professor and the Associate Dean for Research and Development at the Law School here on campus. Beside me is Professor Andrea Matwyshyn, who is a professor at the Wharton Business School with a ton of experience in data security and technologies in teaching, and not beside me, but who will be beside me in a few minutes, will be Professor Michelle Jacobs, who is a professor at the University of Florida, Levin College of Law, who's really done a lot of work using Second Life in law school teaching and is going to give a bit of a demo for you if we can get her computer working when she gets here. What we thought we'd do, just to get started, is that Andrea and I would like to have a bit of a interactive discussion with you in the audience about some issues that we certainly have faced in the law school context and that you probably face in various other contexts. I know we have people here who are IT folks and librarians and probably some professors as well. In fact, we might get a sense of how many people here are teachers, instructors, professors? Anyone? No? Okay, librarian, research people, IT. Okay, so the kinds of topics that we had in mind just to raise and have a discussion about, and I might let Andrea kick off and lead the discussion and we seek your input and thoughts. The things that we've dealt with: student use of Facebook, information on Facebook about interactions between students with professors, bullying, harassment, various things like that, cheating, that kind of thing. Andrea has done some very interesting work using wikis in law school teaching at UF and I think at Wharton as well. Yep. And we've also had issues in law schools, and Tron will be familiar with this, about use of proprietary software for taking exams, and both UF and CASE have had some issues with that, some experience with that. And also just students using wireless technologies, whether you switch it on or off in the classrooms, how disruptive it can be, how easily it can be hacked. So they were kind of the issues we thought might be worth kicking off with, and maybe I'll give it to you to throw some thoughts out there for discussion.
Okay. And actually, I just changed my mind. Let's start with that last one, because
okay.
I think that's what's freshest in our minds.
Let's do it.
So obviously, the prevalence of wireless internet access in classrooms has been a wonderful way to help the classroom be more collaborative, and in fact, you have professors have different theories on this, but I don't mind, for example, if my students do a Google Assist for themselves while I'm talking about something and they are interested in the topic, and so they run a quick Google search to supplement their knowledge. But you have, first of all, a difference of opinion among academics as to whether that's desirable or whether that's disruptive. Secondly, there can be instances where the prevalence of Wi-Fi in classrooms does end in a disruptive situation. There was one case at one of the schools that I taught at formerly where a professor had a large class. Some of the people in the class were using the Wi-Fi network to surf porn during class. And these are law students, mind you. And there was also a chat room going on simultaneously among various members of the class, trashing the class during class, while multitasking with the porn, of course, because, just one would be boring. So this obviously led to a level of disruption in the classroom, and it ultimately ended with that professor banning laptops in the classroom. Now, that's one solution that some academics lean toward, and for those of you who teach yourselves, I'm sure you face this dilemma. For those of you who are in IT or in research, you undoubtedly will have people coming to you asking for advice about how to handle these situations. So I teach technology law-related things. I feel that it would be hypocritical of me to ban laptops in my classroom, and I won't do it, but I knock on whatever this is. I've never had that kind of an extreme disruptive issue in my classroom, but it happens, and this is one anecdote of a broader set of problems. So it might be interesting for us to discuss and to brainstorm collaboratively about how to balance the line between having these open, useful technology flows, such as wireless internet access, in a classroom, which can be a very constructive way for students to, say, work on team projects in the classroom or supplement their learning, but can, on the other hand, very easily turn into a force of disruption for themselves and for the students behind them. So the way that the porn issue came out was the students behind the surfers mentioned that their learning was being disrupted by the flashing images.
And actually, I could play devil's advocate and channel Michelle for a few minutes until she's here. But one of the pluses she has discovered about teaching law classes in Second Life is, in fact, that if students want to have sidebar discussions and not have the discussions with the whole class, they can do that without disrupting the class. Now, that's a little different because if you're teaching in Second Life, you won't have everyone sitting behind everyone else looking at what's on the screen. But there are pluses and minuses to students being able to communicate with themselves, with each other, and not with the whole classroom. It can be a very useful pedagogical thing. The question is, how do you strike that balance? I too teach technology law courses and I don't ban laptops, and I'm quite happy for students to use the technology in class. I often ask them to look up something on the internet in class because I teach cyber law and we might be talking about something and want to know what a particular website says on a particular day. I haven't had the issue of people surfing porn or people complaining about other people surfing porn, so maybe my students just enjoy what each other is doing on the computer and don't talk to me about it. But, you know, a lot of you are IT folk who support the networks that the professors use, and I know people in the law school have had this issue. Do we turn off the wireless? Do we limit what people can do with it? How big an issue is it? Does anyone have thoughts on that? Yep.
I think the question of Wi-Fi is sort of moot at this point because of mobile technologies. So you can turn off Wi-Fi in the classroom,
right.
You can ban laptops, but people have their smartphones with mobile access, they're going to do what they want to do. Mm-hmm. So, you know, be proactive and try to harness that technology for your classroom seems to make more sense. And trying to ban it, I just don't see that as being possible.
Though I might push back just a little bit, perhaps the mobile technologies, and tell me whether you agree, might be less disruptive to a classroom, apart from the, you know, Snoop Dogg ringtones going off. But the ability to load, say, an non-content relevant website on your phone, it's at least slightly more discreet and potentially less disruptive. But, I mean, your point stands. If you've got the technology, you've got the technology, whether it's in one form or another.
I would just offer a parallel example. If you had a TV screen in your classroom playing a news, pick your favorite news outlet, the screen's running across and the sound is coming across, would you have a productive classroom discussion conversation unless you're all watching? So my option would be to say, are you doing crowd control, or are you really trying to get something for your students to participate in? You would turn off the TV if you wanted to participate in the issue. Mm-hmm. Or would you bring distractions in unless it's part of the exercise? Because I've done that to people. You know, we bring distractions to see if they can stay focused. But I would say in a law school situation, you're discussing cases. You should be bringing things all up. But the side conversations can be valuable. Or I think.
So the side conversations can be valuable, but you have to make some decision. I think it's on. You want to make some decision about how you want people interacting with you in the classroom. So, you know, that's just a comment. If you had the TV on, you would turn it off if you wanted that focus. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really dependent on how the person leading the class, whether you're a TA or a faculty or member or whatever, to decide what level of interaction you're going to require in order to ensure that your messages are getting across.
I mean, one thing I would say, it's kind of peripheral, and you may have thoughts on this too, is law schools, and I'm sure other faculties vary as to whether attendance is compulsory or not. And I think that sort of plays into it because, you know, at Case, as far as I know, we don't have a compulsory attendance policy. At least I haven't been asked to enforce it. So I figure students are there because they want to be there, and anyone who's going to be that distracted probably isn't going to come to class anyway. At UF, where I just taught last semester, there's compulsory attendance policy, and then I think maybe the problem's worse because you definitely have people in the classroom who don't want to be there and want to be doing other things, and then, I wonder if that plays a role too, that if the students are kind of selecting for interest in showing up, that they're less likely to be distracted. But I agree with you. I mean, it'd be interesting actually to just turn on a TV in front of the class and start lecturing and see if anyone could follow you, and then make the point about.
Well, on that conversation, there's been a trend for topless meetings, meaning no laptops at the meeting.
Yep.
When I facilitate a meeting, if it's urgent enough, usually we have our laptops up because we're all pulling stuff out of it. So, but that real question is, when you're facilitating a classroom discussion, you decide on how that works, and you can set it all up and go after it.
The parallel point from the student's perspective, at least some law students would certainly make this argument, that by banning laptops, you're in fact inhibiting their learning because that is their natural note-taking medium at this point. And so you are forcing them to interact with the content in a way that isn't their choice and is not optimal for them. That would be the pushback. Now, whether that's true, I don't know. And one thing that's been interesting for me to observe, I taught at 2 law schools before, teaching at Wharton, and now I have MBAs, undergrads, and law students that I'm teaching. And the MBAs and the undergrads tend not to have laptops in class, for reasons that I'm not entirely sure what the cultural difference is. The law students, they've all got their laptops out and clicking away. And it gets to be sort of a perverse incentive structure that as a professor, if you don't hear the clicking of the keys, you assume that your students think you're not saying something important, which is kind of, strange to second guess yourself that way. But it's a great point. Yeah.
So 2 points. One, if Case Law School banned laptops, my daughter would transfer to Marshall. The more relevant point from an IT perspective is really setting expectations as to what you want the laptop to be or not be in the classroom, what you're going to use it for. And then from an infrastructure support standpoint, what we try to do is limit the potential exposure to medium that would be distracting, like porn sites. So setting up WebSense tools and so forth that block it. So there's, culpability all the way around, but really it gets to set expectations, how you're going to integrate the technology into the classroom learning, what do you expect the students' participation to be in terms of not using a laptop, using a laptop, setting up examples of how it could be used. Those are things that I think help delineate responsibility and then bring the technology into use. That's what we found.
I think that's a really good point. And I mean, I get the sense, I teach predominantly the upper level tech specific classes, and I'm pretty free about what people do. I think a lot of the first year law teachers who are teaching students for the first time how to think like a lawyer, how to analyse a case, I think they might be the people perhaps who have more of a problem and may need to do more of what you're talking about if they allow laptops have clear rules about what you can and can't use them for, whereas in a smaller upper level class where I want them to use the technology and I encourage them to do so, it's pretty clear. So it may be that different teachers, even within the law school, have different thoughts. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, and that actually goes to one of the points I was going to make, which are there's kind of 2 levels that, of the conversation about laptops. And the first one is that, and I have some sympathy for the notion that in a certain kind of law school class, the very conventional Socratic kind of classroom where you want that, very verbal sort of single-tracked focus on, presence that, it's technically hard to do. It makes you seem, like you're getting in the way of something. But I have some sympathy for at least the objective. But the more interesting question, I guess, in the classroom where you do want the sort of the permissible back channel or the desirable back channel to happen, there's not any technical way that you can differentiate that from any other activities. So I think it really needs to be norm setting in the classroom, teaching techniques that pull attention in certain ways, walking around the room, who knows, having a plant, to throw crazy ideas out there. But, just to sort of I guess, clarify the discussion is like, yeah, there might be one kind of law school classroom where, you know, the banning of conductivity may, at least be something we ought to have some sympathy for. But then the trickier questions come in the, you know, how do we encourage the sort of back channel that we know is going to be out there to work in a productive way? I think that's sort of where the sort of norm setting and all the tricky cultural questions come in.
That's a really good point.
Maybe we should move on to the mandatory exam software.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so then the next topic that we'll solicit your thoughts on, there's a trend toward requiring software for exam administration with students in classrooms. And because, especially in law school settings, exams are increasingly typed, there's a positive aspect to that in that they're easier to read. They perhaps don't give away at least the gender of the author, so there's a anonymity value in having typed exams. But the practice of administering it in a classroom, the way that it's evolving is that the best thing people come up with is requiring students to load up software that basically locks up their machines, and they then activate that software in the exam room and use that package to type up their exam. Now, the practical problems that arise, as you might suspect, is with any piece of code, there are glitches. So I've had students whose entire systems have been destabilized when they loaded this set of particular applications, and then they've lost their term papers, they've lost their outlines, and especially with high-stress first-year law students, that's just massive world-ending kind of trauma that they experience when that happens. So you have code running badly, but then on the other hand, you have a set of hacking problems. So I had students, both in my first-year law student classes and my upper-level classes, who had technology skills that were very superior to those of their fellow classmates. And I had one of my students who happened to be ex-counter intel with the U.S. Armed Forces come in and hack the program right in front of me. Okay, so clearly he is at a competitive advantage over his classmates because of his tech skills. So the entire question of how to mitigate one kind of bias using technology by having these typed exams versus harming the same people that you're trying to help versus having this elite group of people who now have a competitive advantage because of tech skills. Where is the optimal line to draw, and is there some other solution to this problem of having a technology-based anonymized exam administration without the negative externalities of destabilized systems and some students being able to simply hack into their notes at any point in time? Are there any thoughts? I'm genuinely throwing this out because this is a problem that has not been solved, and there are various packages out there that various universities are using. All of them have issues, or maybe you have some experiences with these packages.
Buy the cheap netbooks, install the software, you pass them out, they check out the netbook, and when you come in to take the test, you turn it in. They don't really own any of the stuff on the laptop, and you reuse them for the next exam. You just have a box of them.
Really good solution, yeah. And as the cost of netbooks go down, do you think universities would be willing to invest in a set of netbooks simply for that purpose?
Easily. You know, the idea would be it's part of your technology investment. I mean, they're not nearly as expensive as a core router or some of the network infrastructure.
Interesting.
And they could be refreshed every 3 years.
Yeah. And this is something that really became viable only within the last few years with the cost of netbooks going down. Maybe that is the optimal solution. Does anyone have any other thoughts or counterpoints? Yeah. That's the best solution I've heard, by the way, so far.
Well, and I don't know that it's a solution, but it's just a comment that I think as faculty, as IT, we all try to make the testing environment as rigorous as we can and as secure as we can. But in the long run, if a student is going to cheat, they're going to be very innovative, whether it's putting answers on the back of a Coke bottle and then you ban Coke bottles from the testing environment. Maybe they've got an iPod in their ear that's not really an iPod. It's communication with some person outside the room. There's just so many ways that a student can cheat that I don't know that hacking into the system is even the most beneficial or the most productive. That we try to build that rigor in, but in the long run, it's an ethical issue for that student, and they're truly cheating themselves. You know, if you can build that into the classroom sense that, you know, you have to learn this material, you're going to need it once you graduate. Other than that, I don't know what else to say because they can write it on the bottom of their shoe.
I'll just share briefly my favorite new technique that I ran across in the last couple years. We actually had a discussion at a faculty meeting at Wharton about innovative Wharton student cheating techniques, and my favorite was the rubber band technique. Is anyone familiar with this? So apparently our little hackers like to take a rubber band, stretch it out, and write formulas and elements of, you know, whatever the exam is testing on the rubber band in stretched out form, and then when it contracts, it looks just like a decorative rubber band, and they wear it on their wrist, and then they play with it during the exam. So when it expands again, you have useful information. I thought that was so innovative. You know, I'm thinking, you know, if you applied yourself to that extent of learning the material, you'd get your A anyway, but yeah, so that's it.
Do people see a difference from levels I taught 30, 40 years ago and, you know, had the occasional cases of problems around plagiarism because people had to turn in typed papers?
Yeah.
But is there an increase, and to what degree has there become an ethical softness in people's judgment of what is allowable and what is original and what is not? Mm-hmm. On the one hand, we talk collaboration. On the other hand, you're asking somebody for student work, or original work, untainted by the ideas of others. Mm-hmm. And how do you help students in your learning to make that distinction? Yeah,
well, I think there's certainly an increased attractiveness to cheating in some ways, such as copying an entire paper wholesale off the internet. I think there's something more attractive now about that. In the past, you had to at least retype it, right, yourself. But we had a case back when I was teaching at University of Florida where a tax graduate student lifted a paper off the internet in its entirety. And the professor sensed that there was something up with this paper, and she and I hopped on Google and poked around, and sure enough, we found the paper word for word. So that sort of quick cheat, I think, exists to a higher extent now than it did in the past.
I would say, and I've seen this a couple of times in seminars in the last few years, and it perplexes me. I think the technology enables students to write papers differently. So I'm not talking about exams now. Now I'm talking about like a research paper. And so when students hand in a first draft, often it's clearly copied chunks from articles on Lexis or Westlaw, and you know, you pull them aside for plagiarism. It's easy to sort of find what they've done, and actually that's now their process. They write the paper by putting all these chunks in. That's their first draft, and then they just sort of overlay on top of it their own thoughts, and then they footnote, and it's really hard for me to tell now, is that plagiarism or not? Because the final product clearly is their own work, but instead of having the resource materials next to them and writing, the resource materials are in the same document underneath what they're ultimately going to write. It's the line between plagiarism and independent work, I think, is really blurring. We are going to do this second life demo. Oh, okay. Do you want to? Because we've only got like 15, 20 minutes. Okay. Sure.
You're going to see, not just in the classroom, but I see just lots of evidence of just look at the internet, in which different news outlets and blogs are borrowing heavily across everything. And you're getting identical stories, swarming on stories, and so on, all from the same small pool of information. And so as a result, that kind of practice becomes tenable and allowable, becomes the kind of cultural norm. And I think even when I look at and see some major figures, college presidents among them, charged with plagiarism, borrowing other people's articles, or strongly depending upon their ideas. So I think we face a really huge difficulty in this day and age of what is genuinely original, and the idea of copying is just proliferating across the screen.
In another area, I do a lot of work in copyright, and I think the norms in the blogosphere are really beginning to change. I agree with you. What we think of as copying, sometimes it's very hard to even track down the original author, and sometimes it doesn't matter. You know, sometimes the person who wrote something, the norm is that they want it to spread. And, you know, in the US, we don't have this concept of moral rights, so we're not so hung up about the right of attribution other than in universities when we have plagiarism as a violation of the honour code. And I find that really interesting. I think that is changing, but I don't know what it's changing to. I don't know what the ultimate norms will look like. How are we going?
I'm good.
Oh, okay. Well, this is Professor Jacobs from the University of Florida, who has been doing a really fascinating experiment that she's taught once or twice before this. Twice. This seminar on virtual worlds in Second Life. Using a sort of mock-up of the UF campus and a classroom in UF, and I was hoping that she could show you how this looked, because this picks up from where we started, which was, technology in the classroom can be a problem. This is perhaps an upside of the technology in the classroom. So
Perhaps.
I'll hand it over to Michelle.
Okay. First, let me apologize for being delayed. Hotel clocks. With different times. And the only cab driver in Cleveland who didn't know where Case Western was. Okay, so after the scenic tour of the campus, I'm now here. But while there, I came from a technology conference last week where none of the demonstrations could work because the school firewalled everything, and that hadn't been checked out before. So I did a slideshow just in case, the technology doesn't work, but we'll be hopeful. Anyway, I like to talk about this because I'm not what you would call an early adopter of new technology. I didn't get a cell phone that had a camera until I was absolutely forced to, because I couldn't find another cell phone. So I'm not normally someone who, and I think in the 3 years that I've had it, I've taken 2 pictures, which I don't even know where they are. So I like to talk about this because I'm not a person who's an early adopter of technology. This is very difficult technology, and yet I want to encourage people to experiment with it because it has some fabulous possibilities. One of the things that I found, I'm a law professor as well, as you know, so one of the things I've been finding about my students is, one, that they don't read. 2, when they do read, they don't comprehend very well. They don't engage with the materials. And even though this is a generation that grew up with the internet, they don't know how to do research electronically. So, all those things kind of, disturb me. And I'll have in a seminar a group of students who have maybe 40 or 50 pages of reading to read and think about, and they try to do that in the 5 minutes before class starts. So they're really completely unprepared for any kind of serious discussion in class. So I said, okay, what can I do to get them more engaged and get them excited about some technology that they might already be familiar with from gaming? And so, I discovered Second Life just on my own, with having nothing to do with education. And I had been in there for about a year before I discovered that our campus had presence in Second Life, though the law school had opted out of the project, of course, because lawyers also are afraid of technology. So what I did is I met with the Digital Worlds Institute people on our main campus and tried to figure out how we could use this technology to help our students learn better. Now, that's me coming into existence right there. So I'll just put it so that I'll walk so that you can see me. This is the Levin College of Law, the virtual Levin College of Law. It was built for us by, as I say, the technology people at Digital Worlds. What I'm going to do is just show you a couple things right quick, and then explain to you what we were trying to accomplish with this project. Okay. Normally I bang myself in the head with the door, but okay. We're doing good here. So we basically, as you can do in virtual platforms, we did a modified replication of the law school, although that's not really necessary because it is virtual and you can have the environment in any way you want. But this is a hallmark feature of our law campus. It's the ceremonial classroom where we have all our big events and guest speakers and so forth and so on. So in this location, my seminar was broken up into several components, 14 weeks of 6 or 7 units. Every 2 weeks was a different unit. We had the students blogging as well as attending class as well as doing different projects in this space. So every 2 weeks there would be 2 principal bloggers who had to read all of the material for that unit plus some readings just for the principal bloggers. It was their responsibility to read the materials, do a blog entry highlighting what the legal issues are, where the law was weak, what needed to be talked about, so forth and so on. And that had to be done on a Sunday night by midnight. By Tuesday night at midnight, the rest of the class who were not principal bloggers had to respond to that blog posting, raising questions about the posting and the materials that they read. Then on Thursday, when the class met, we would discuss the blog entries, whatever I had to add to it, and take questions and answers and so forth and so on. And so that's what would happen. Every other week, or whenever we could get the technology to work, we would have a guest panel, which was often international, of legal scholars who were experts in that particular field of law that we were discussing. They would come to the ceremonial classroom and do a presentation to the students. Before they came in, maybe 24 hours before they came in, the students would do Q&A, email it to the presenters so that they could have some idea of what questions the students had about the materials before they got there. Then they did their presentations and we actually had a Q&A. So normally I would walk over to my classroom to show you that, but since we're short on time, I'm just going to teleport over there so you can see the technology. In Second Life, you can walk, fly, or teleport. So all over campus, you'll see these boards, and these are the teleport boards that take you from one location to another. They're scripted objects. Okay, so this is my classroom. This is where the students and I actually met. As you could see, all the classrooms are media enabled, so we can do movies, YouTube clips, PowerPoint slides, whatever we wanted to do, we could do it in the space. The students, I did my class in voice, but the students could also text if they wanted to. And many students actually did choose to text. The great thing about text was that you can cut and paste it into a document if you want it for preservation purposes later, and you can also save it to the hard drive. So they could either text or IM me or speak in voice. Interestingly enough, few of the students wanted to speak in voice, so even though I was speaking in voice, they were texting me the whole time. They were using text the whole time. So I ended up teaching the class in voice, text, and through IM, which was crazy. Very tired and exhausted at the end, but they loved it. So, and plus they could talk to each other about things that were going on in the class. If they had questions about each other, they could IM each other without disturbing the class or putting their conversation with each other in the text record. So that was kind of fun. The assignments were delivered in World. So I'm going to talk about some of the difficulties that people who are not technology enabled can have. As you see right here, this black box is a sign-in box. So if you touch it, you'll see on the screen, I have the text local chat in the box, but this would be normally on the screen. It says I've already signed in. So I didn't script this box, someone else scripted it for me, and it's supposed to tell me how many students are in the class and who's in the class, because it can read the avatar's UUID, which is their personal identification number. Of course, because I didn't script it, I couldn't control quality, so it tells me how many people are there, but it never would tell me who's there. You know, so for record purposes, it was a little difficult. That's my own fault because I don't script, and when I saw that, I said, oh, I need to learn how to script, so I scripted the assignment box. So when the students come in, they can just click the box and get whatever assignment they need. If I was a good scripter, that blue screen would be a menu, Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, so forth and so on. But because I'm not a scripter, it's just all of the units, and you have to go through and pick the one you want. So that's kind of awkward. But next semester, it'll be a menu, and then they can just pick the particular assignment that they want. So I just want to show you the library right quick. Well, actually, this is a good example. I decided to keep this one particular unit. So it's loading. It's going to tell me what the reading assignment is and where I can find the materials. And this is actually a good one because it tells me to go to the library so that I can get the information digitally. And so that's what the students would do if they're doing the assignment in World. So we're just going to go to the library right quick, because that's the last main feature of the building. We also have a courtroom in the building that's built to scale of our brand new advocacy center. It has a full courtroom, a judge's robing room, a jury deliberation room, and 2 mediation rooms that are separated so that sound won't encroach one on the other. So if the mediation clinic or the mediation course wanted to actually have the students role play a mediation, they could do it in the space without the 2 sides actually being able to hear each other. This is our digital library. The black object in the rear is the reference desk, which contains all of the law school's digital materials. So if you click on that desk, it'll give you an object that you can keep in your inventory. You see right here. All avatars have an inventory. And in the inventory, there'll be an object from the reference desk. If I click on that object, or I think actually I have to wear it, it opens up and gives me links to every single digital piece of information that the library has in its physical space, okay? And then, because the students don't really know how to use the library or do research, they could come to the stacks, which are all labeled by the different kinds of materials that we have at the law school. And if they click on the stack, it offers them an object. When they wear the object, it tells them how to go online to get those particular materials. Like, for example, law students are notoriously bad at finding the record of congressional discussions. They know that they exist, but they are difficult materials to find. If they click on the link for the congressional records, it'll take them to the electronic website where they can explore different sessions of Congress and find out what was discussed, what bills were debated, who said what about what. Law review articles that are available electronically could also be accessed. So each of the stacks represents a collection from the physical law school, so that if they wanted to leave the virtual space and go into the physical law school, they would have an idea in the library where to go for the information that they were looking for. So that's basically in a nutshell what the program was. Some of the challenges we had was that the learning curve is very high, obviously, for people who are not technology enabled. And I found that there was a gendered difference in the class. The women were very reluctant to use the technology, and it took me a full 2 to 3 weeks to get them where they weren't afraid to touch the keyboard because they were going to break something, which I thought was really kind of amazing. But once they got it, they were just as good as the guys in terms of using the technology. The guys were, the first day jumping off of buildings and, yes. Trying to blow up things and blah, blah, blah. So that's basically the experience. It's you can do whatever you want. You can build whatever your content you want. It's one of the few virtual platforms where you can actually create your own content and load it into the server. Some of the downfalls is very high. The learning curve is very high. It's very expensive. There's an open source project going on right now called OpenSim, where you can, do all of this for free. Of course, it's sort of like an alpha stage, but at any rate, it's a wonderful thing. You can get a Second Life account for free, and your students can get for free, and it's free to experiment with. Yes.
If you could talk a little bit more to what you feel like you gained, if you feel like you gained, from doing this in Second Life,
right,
with this virtualization of space. Rather than just more abstractly, introducing, text messaging,
yeah,
and instant communication,
Okay.
other
well,
kinds of electronic communication in the classroom.
Right. One of our, the course itself was called Criminal Law in the Virtual Context, and we were trying to evaluate whether behaviors that occur online or in world, either of the two, could actually rise to the level of violations of real criminal law. So one of the things that happens is that they're in the space and they experience it, so they're able to get the parallels. Like if you're stalked in virtual space, is that the same as cyber stalking, for example? If someone sends you 100 text messages a day, is that the same as if someone comes and griefs you in Second Life? So we had those kinds of discussions. If you have you have a bank account in Second Life and someone hacks it, is that a theft, or is this just a violation of the terms of service? You know, so by experiencing that, they really got to understand what the client base might actually be experiencing. The other thing is, too, that it gave them access in real time as opposed to the online long distance learning where you're just by yourself. It gave them an opportunity to interact with people in Europe, in South America, you know, that our school would never have been able to have access to. We just wouldn't be able to afford it, and we're not ranked high enough for those people to be interested in us. But because the people could come in as avatars, they just wanted to do it. And they came in, and if you know the case of Lori Drew, where the mom got prosecuted when she opened the MySpace account and the other little girl committed suicide because she thought she was jilted by the little boy. We had the lawyer from that case create an avatar and come to the law school and speak to my students about the case. That would have been impossible. He's some really big lawyer in California. You know, never would my students have had access to that. And because the lawyers who came were doing cutting edge work, they were interested in my students because my students were doing cutting edge research and work. And we made the blog open to the people who came to speak to the class so that the lawyers could actually see their writing. It did improve their writing, and it did improve the level of preparation for class. So it was a win-win for all of us. Yeah. The one downside was myself and the students all felt, because we were in the same location, we weren't coming online from all over the world, that we really needed some face time. So I bumped into one of my students at a restaurant, and we didn't hardly even recognize her. She knew who I was, but I was like, no, what's your avatar's name? so next semester, we're going to build in, like every 4 weeks, we're going to build in a face-to-face so that we can sort of bond at that level. Yes.
Is Second Life changing patterns of cooperation, do you think?
I think it is, because you can collaborate however. But it also carries the same difficulties that real life carries. So you have bad behavior. You have people who try to cheat. You know, you get all the human bad things, but you get some really great possibilities of collaboration. And even if you don't want to collaborate, just the space to be creative by yourself is also, I think, a fascinating one.
I think that we're about to be told we have to stop, are we? Are we at time? Okay, well, I would just very much like to thank my speakers, Michelle and Andrea, who flew in from other places and drove in in a cab. And Andrea has to run right out, but Michelle may answer a few questions
I'm here.
offline.
And if you want help in coming into World, I'm happy to help train anyone. I've trained about 20 people now, and I'm really good at it.